Hello, my name is Devin Maraspini, and this is my restoration presentation. The title of my presentation is Understanding the Keys of the Melchizedek Priesthood Rather Than Knowing Them. And if this sounds interesting to you, it's because it is super interesting. Now, let me give you some background on why I chose this topic. Back in Unit 4, we were talking about the restoration of the priesthood and the organization of the church, and we talked about what the keys of the Melchizedek priesthood were. And we made this cute little list. It said keys of apostleship, keys of the dispensation of the fullness of times, and keys of the kingdom. And then we just moved on and we didn't talk about it anymore. And I was just left thinking, what does this even mean? What is apostleship? What is the dispensation of the fullness of times? And me also serving in the presidency of my elders quorum, I was thinking a lot about this. And so I took it upon myself to make this my restoration project. And I did some research and I'm really, really satisfied with what I learned and what I found. And I'm excited to share it with you today. And to preface what I've learned, I'd just like to say that this is not priesthood. This is just a bunch of dudes. This is not priesthood. This is a vial that holds oil. And these guys, as amazing and rad as they are not priesthood. They hold priesthood and they hold priesthood keys, but they themselves are not priesthood. What I'm trying to get at is priesthood power cannot be depicted by an image. Priesthood power and priesthood keys are intangible and can manifest themselves in many different ways. Priesthood keys is something that is miraculous and something that can provide meaning to our lives and to the eternities, and something I think we should think more about more often. As far as doctrine goes, I decided this was a core doctrine because priesthood power has been given to man ever since Adam and continues to be essential for guiding his church and ministering to his children. It's an unchanging truth of salvation. Now, in my research of scholarly articles, I came across one titled The Circumference of the Apostleship by Richard E. Bennett. And in talking about the apostleship, he said the following: the apostleship was again restored, which holds all the keys, authorities, and powers to administer, not only in outward ordinances, but also to confer the Spirit of the living God. Now, I thought this was really interesting because the use of these two phrases right here, administer, which reminds me of governing, directing, leading, leadership, and also conferring the Spirit, which reminds me of just straight up ministering. And so apostleship, referring to, the calling of apostles, their duty and their authority is given to administer and to minister in the church. In another article titled Peter and the Restored Priesthood, Stephen Harper takes a more of a New Testament perspective in talking about the keys of the priesthood. And he says something that I thought was so cool. He was talking about the endowment and how men and women can be endowed with power from on high. And he said, this is what priesthood had always meant, and what the Lord meant when he told Peter, I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Obtaining these powers of the holy priesthood, as Joseph called them, was imperative to saving the human family from sin and death. This is so cool. I think this is so amazing. And I don't know why I didn't think of Matthew 16 when I was thinking about the keys of Melchizedek priesthood before. But literally Christ himself says that he's going to give the keys of the kingdom, and he describes them right after, saying that it's the power to bind and loose on earth and also in heaven. Now, what does this mean to me in my own words? This means that with the keys of the kingdom, we can dissolve the barrier between heaven and earth and grant some of that divine nature from heaven to earth and allow us to enjoy those blessings. And Joseph Smith himself even says that this is imperative to saving the human family from sin and death. Now, I also consulted some prophetic talks. One was by Bruce R. McConkie in the 1980s titled The Keys of the Kingdom, and also a more recent one from just a year ago from Down Late Jokes titled The Melchizedek Priesthood and the Keys. And I gained some really good insights about these. I also researched in the scriptures in Doctrine and Covenants section 107. I came across a couple key words and phrases that I thought were very meaningful. One was that they called the keys of the kingdom also keys of spiritual blessings. And also they use words such as commune and communion, meaning that the keys of the kingdom allow us to have a more deeper relationship with God, providing us with spiritual blessings. And in Doctrine and Covenants section 27, they describe the apostleship as special witnesses of Christ's name, which I think most of us already knew. But also in describing the dispensation of the gospel of the last times, he talks about gathering. And if you haven't heard anything about the gathering of Israel in the last couple of years, you've been on a different planet, because that has been the topic of the church as of recent times. And one other thing I found to be insightful was Joseph Smith's conferring of the Melchizedek priesthood on Oliver Cowdery. And in the blessing of that ordination, he says to endow him with power from on high, that he may write, preach, and proclaim the gospel to his fellow men in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. So just a little more to think about. So the concepts that I learned were, one, the keys of the Melchizedek priesthood that were restored into Joseph Smith are not foreign concepts. They are the same keys Jesus gave to his apostles. And concept two is what they actually mean. The keys of the apostleship represent apostolic succession and authority to govern this church rightfully. The keys of the kingdom represent the authority to establish Christ's church again on the earth, along with the sealing power to dismantle the barrier between heaven and earth. And also the keys of the dispensation of the fullness of times represents that kingdom's duty to gather Israel once again in preparation for the second coming. Now, if there's one takeaway I want you to get from my presentation, it's this. A superficial understanding or mere memorization of the keys of the Melchizedek priesthood are not sufficient. Along with the constant recognition that the Melchizedek priesthood is not Melchizedek's, the associated keys that were restored to this earth signify unfathomable and eternal blessings that begin while in this mortal realm. Thank you.